Hello and welcome to another edition of Agenda 2063 TV show, the only show in Ghana, the region, the continent, telling you authentic stories about Africa's integration area. We're always going to come back to the issue of 63 because it really is the, let's say, the very cornerstone of Africa's development, and we need to continue to unpack it the very best way possible. So welcome to the show. My name is Aprm Jr., your regular host for the show. We're going to take a quick break in a minute. Okay, so welcome back from the break, and today is another special edition where we're really going to take a look at how the AU engages media and communication going forward. Now, we all know that the AU has been around for quite a while. It's like a grandfather now. It's like 63 years old or so. The AU was established, or the OAU/AU was established in 1963. So it's been around for 50-something years. So it's like a kind grandfather who doesn't say much. But it's good to know that it's been doing a lot of things. So many things, some of which we know, some of which we don't. In Ghana, for example, there is a school feeding program that a lot of schools enjoy. Many people, for example, don't know that this school feeding is part of what the AU calls the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, the CADEP program, which enjoins member states to dedicate 10% of their budget to agriculture. And the school feeding program is Ghana's response to CADEP. In other words, it's Ghana saying that this is what we are doing as a member state of the AU for school children by making sure that they get adequate food and nutrition and so on. So it's an AU program, but in Ghana it is not couched as an AU program. It is just couched as school feeding. But when you do the homework and the research, these are some of the things that the AU does. So AU will do a lot of programs, and then when it gets to the country, it's couched as local solutions or local responses, but you may not know that it is an AU idea, and so on. So today, when I decided that, look, let's have a conversation about the media and how the media engages the African Union, it is not without reason. Because for a long time, there's so many media networks out there. We've heard of media networks for women, media networks for agriculture, media networks for peace and security, so many of them. And these media networks are supposed to help the media engage these stakeholders in a way that it makes it easier when they want to tell stories and so on. And usually these stakeholders, whether it's the AU or whether it's any organization, will use this network to help amplify the stories of that particular theme. So for example, for the AU, they have this, what they call the Agenda 2063 Media Network, which I've spoken to before. The idea is that members of this media network that is populated by journalists across the continent from all the different regions, the 5 regions, are supposed to write stories about Agenda 2063 so that people get to understand that Agenda 2063 is alive, it's working, that kind of thing. So this is the kind of thing they do, and usually the information is passed from the communications people at NEPAT, the AU Development Agency, to the journalists so that they can use news updates and to write stories and go and hold interviews, that kind of thing. There are so many of these networks across the continent. What you will find is that sometimes they engage the media all right, but then it's just about, oh, here are stories to report on, here are stories to write up, here are stories to, and then it's just about information flow from the organization to the media people to write stories, to amplify. Occasionally they may be invited for a meeting or they may be invited for a training, and that's where it stops. But as the AU turns 20 next year, the AU as in the African Union from the OAU, the African Union as in the successor to the OAU that became the AU from 2000 to 2022, 2002 to 2022, we are going to see an AU that is 20 years old. Therefore, an AU that needs to do things differently. And therefore, an AU that also needs to communicate differently. And so a lot of these media networks will need to re-engage, reinvent themselves, look at the way in which they communicate, look at the way in which they need to start engaging the media and how effectively they do so. One such network I can talk to you, the reason for which we are here today, is the African peer review mechanism. Of course, if you've been following the Agenda 2063 TV show, you will know that the Aprm is no stranger to Africa, to Agenda 2063. It's something that we've been talking about quite a bit. Sometimes we do it in a segment, sometimes we do it in a full program. And so the whole idea of the Aprm really is to ensure that we have what we call the Aprm Watch. And so the idea is to get people to understand what the Aprm is about, why it exists, and why people need to follow it. What the Aprm decided to do was to do something differently by having what they call the Aprm champions. But there's a history to it. And so I'm going to really briefly go into the history, and then we'll get to why it is important, therefore, in the context of an AU that is celebrating 20 years next year. You know, some of these media networks that are out there could begin to look at the model that the Aprm is using and see how it can also improve the way it communicates and the way it engages media and journalists. So, in 2019, the Aprm held a meeting in Addis. And then this meeting was one within the context of a UNESCO meeting, looking at information and these kind of things. I think it was a 2 or 3 day meeting where lots of people across the world were invited to Addis to go and talk about the role of information, media, and in a whole number of things. And so the Aprm decided to have a meeting to look at how to begin engaging the media. It is not as if that they had not had a conversation before on the media. When you look at the history, the Aprm has tried to engage the media for many years. Before this current head, CEO, or Professor Maloka, took over a few years ago, the Aprm was actually not that very visible. It was hiding in some corner, doing its own work, and a lot of people didn't know about it. So it was really this new head, the CEO, Professor Maloka, about 3 or 4 years ago, that a lot of people began to become more interested in what the Aprm is doing and why it's important. The country review missions that it does, the peer review mechanism, why Kenya is doing so well, why Ghana is not doing so well, how Kenya has domesticated at the national level, why this good governance is Africa's own governance, and why it's so very important, and so on. So this meeting in Ethiopia was a good space to have that discussion so that people would begin to think through why the media was necessary in the context of Aprm. So that meeting was held, and that 2 or 3 day meeting, after that it was decided that it was important to begin setting up a network for communicators. So an Aprm communicators network was established in Johannesburg in a couple of weeks later, May 2019. So with that communication network established, things began to take shape. Some committees were established and proposed and so on and so forth. But interestingly, nothing much happened because a lot of activities were taking place with Aprm. There are lots of things always happening with Aprm. Sometimes there's a meeting in Accra, sometimes there's a meeting somewhere, sometimes 2 or 3 people are all over the place, and they report to the secretariats in South Africa with different results all the time, because there's so many activities sometimes that are running parallel to each other. So you may find that in 1 week, 2 or 3 activities are happening at the same time. So the biggest thing that happened in 2019 was that after the communications network was established, in July there was a youth network for Aprm that was established, the Aprm Youth Network. And so that APRM Youth Network, what happened was that it was the Chad, the government of Chad, that decided that, look, we are interested. We are currently chairing the APRM forum, so we want young people to take more interest in good governance of Africa. And so a youth network would allow that kind of setup to be established. And so we find that the APRM Youth Network is established. It's been running for the past 2 years. Even though COVID hit the whole world in 2020, because they had the WhatsApp platform, a lot of things were happening. And they were also using the media to make sure that they would galvanize other youth around the continent to ensure that some of the useful things around APRM was happening. They always made sure that they were getting the media on board as well, whichever country they went. But the most important thing was that the network was happening, and even with COVID and people behind machines and Zoom, things were moving. And so with that happening in December, a meeting took place in 2019, still 2019, where the APRM decided to have what they call the Africa Governance Report, which was the first of its kind, looking at how governance is practiced on the continent. And so the media, some of the members of the media who had been present in Johannesburg for the launching of the network in May were also invited to the Africa Governance Report to speak to some of the themes around APRM. So you could say that it was a test case for the APRM because some of the media were asked to make presentations on the Africa Governance Report. A lot of them acquitted themselves very well about, I think there are about 6 or 7 chapters, and each chapter was handled by a member of the communicators network. So it was a real test case. But of course, come 2020, March 2020, the whole world was almost in lockdown and so on and so forth. And no one was really talking about APR. Everyone was talking health. But then, of course, Agenda 2063 TV show was there, had been running in 2020. And we felt that, no, we had to continue the conversation about APRM. Just because COVID was here didn't mean that it needed to die. And so we set up APRM Watch to ensure that the conversation each week with each edition, at least as long as the show was alive, the show closed for a brief period in March, but then came back in July of 2020. And the APRM Watch continued, where each week we were given updates on APRM, why it was important, some of the activities that were running, that kind of thing, and so on and so forth. So you could see that for Agenda 2063 TV show, APRM was important and continues to be, because we see that it is very well connected to Agenda 2063. APRM is also monitoring Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and seeing the extent to which member states are mainstreaming it in their programming. So without a doubt, it makes sense that Agenda 2063 is very important to APRM. But come 2021, something very interesting happened. The very first meeting of the APRM Communicators Network happened in Nairobi, Kenya, in September 2021. This was the very first meeting after COVID, so many breaks, so much time, so much water under the bridge. And they decided there that they really needed to get serious on engaging the media, engaging the communicators who were already part of the network, so that the APRM issues could continue to be communicated. And especially because they had what they call hashtag towards universal accession 2023, which is whereby all member states should have adhered to the APRM by 2023. Right now, there are 41 member states that have adhered to the APRM of self-governance, self-assessment, and good governance. So we need 14 more member states between now and 2023 to ensure that all member states have adhered to this voluntary self-assessment of good governance. There's still a lot of work to do. Some regions have done better than others. Central Africa, for example, needs a lot of engagement and mobilization to get more countries on board. So, and this is not going to happen by itself. you'll need people to communicate, people to showcase the activities of APRM so that these kind of things can happen. And so the APRM decided to nominate what they call champions, just in the same way that the AU also has champions for different things. For Ghana, the president of Ghana was champion at one point for gender, then later champion for the African institutions, the African Monetary Fund, the Africa Investment Bank, and so on and so forth, financing for African institutions, let's put it that way. So the APRM decided to adopt that model of champions for the communicators so that some of the communicators / journalists / media people who had been nominated would take it upon themselves that they are championing the cause of APRM as a support to the APRM staff itself. So they are championing the cause without being staff, but they are supporting the staff in a way that they get more information than they would if they were not they will get more information than they would if they were not part of the organization. So in other words, they get some kind of privileged access to some information so that they can use that information to do the communication more effectively. So it's not as if that the APRM does not have its own communication. It does, but it's only one or two people. And they are so busy that they honestly cannot communicate as effectively as they would like to. They always have someone tweeting whenever they go on mission or wherever it is on the continent. But it is not the same as having people, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who are dedicated to communicating the work of APRM. And so the APRM Champions thing was adopted in September in Nairobi, and it has really kicked off just about a week or two ago, whereby 4 champions, 2 representing West Africa for now, 1 representing Southern Africa, the other representing East Africa, have got to work. A Facebook group has been set up. Now a WhatsApp platform has been set up. There's also a Twitter page had been set up about a year ago or so, but it was mostly for the communications network. Now it is for the champions to use, and all the champions have access to that Twitter page so that wherever the meeting may be, whether it's in their own country or whether it's outside, wherever they go, they'll use that Twitter page to communicate some of the activities of APRM. So we have seen, for example, that one of the champions from Southern Africa, she's called Susie, from Zambia specifically, she was invited to Cairo to cover a meeting. The meeting was in 3 parts. One was looking at disaster management, and disaster management in the context of COVID. Why COVID caused some countries like Chad, like Mozambique, like even Ghana itself, to consider revising the way it looks at disaster management and to how to compel it to do better in disaster management policies and so on. And then it also looked at the National Program of Action, how the National Program of Action that they have, their own program of action nationally, can be aligned with the AU's program of action under the APRM. And then they also looked at some other governance issues as well. So there are about 3 meetings that took place in that 1 week in Cairo, and the Southern African champion hit the ground running. As soon as she started the meeting, she was tweeting almost every day. She really tweeted every day under the hashtag or under the Twitter account at APRM Champions to make sure that it was gaining traction, there was visibility. I can tell you that there are about 24 followers, new followers after that week because of the way in which she was tweeting very actively for almost every session. Even the APRM was not tweeting as much. So you would find that when you go to Twitter, you'll find that the APRM champions actually tweeted much more, probably twice more than the official APRM account, which tells you the value of already the champions, how useful they can be, because we got a lot more information from the champions who were actually giving more information than the official account of APRM would have done. So we can tell you that the Aprm mission in Cairo was very useful and was a success, and is also an example of the future of how other APRM champions are going to champion the cause of APRM wherever they may be, whether it's in Accra, Nairobi, wherever, and therefore why it is important to continue to use this model by APRM to see how the AU can engage media networks. Right now, there are a lot of media networks all over the place, like I said, competing for attention, competing to do trainings and all these things. But trainings can never be enough. We need to start getting more proactive on engaging the media. If we really want them to do the work that we say we want them to do, then we need to really give them more privileged access to some of the things that the staff of the organization would get, so that they can use that to deliver the work that they do. Of course, it is understood that these positions are not salaried, but at least, even if they're not salaried, but there are some perks, as in occasionally you'll get something because you are doing work that ordinarily a staff would do. That is sufficient incentive, sufficient motivation to make sure that we change the conversation on how communicators, journalists, media people can engage institutions such as the AU. And so in closing, I would want to say that the APRM Champions is here to stay. And what we need to therefore do is that see going forward whether this is a model that can be adopted by other AU agencies looking to set up networks. And even then, even at the national level, whichever country one may be, you can also, some of these countries can also identify whether this model can be adopted even in their national countries. Gender is a very topical issue, for example, in countries like Ghana and in West Africa. Can a gender champion in an organization nationally, for example, be given privileged access to gender information to be able to deliver gender visibility on issues? Can the same be done for disability network, for example? Would they be given privileged access to information about disability so that they can use that to do better advocacy on their work? So these are the kind of things, from our perspective, we believe that it's important to begin rethinking how we engage the media. It is not enough to say that we have set up a network and we're just sending them to trainings, giving them papers to rewrite and report so that people will become interested. No, interest does not happen automatically. You need to also motivate the journalists in a way that they also feel useful and they also feel that they are doing something constructive. So as we wind down, this really is the message, that the APRM Champions has come to stay. It has become, we want to see it as a model that will work for the continent. And we hope to see more of the AU agencies also looking up to this model to see how the communicators and media people can be better engaged, to be encouraged to also learn how some of these AU agencies work. And we believe that AU, as the AU turns 20 next year, now is the time to do things differently. We cannot begin to have a grandfather organization that's been running for many years and is still doing the same old things. We need to change the narrative. And as we change the narrative, we believe also that we need to document some of these things well. So the APRM Champions has undertaken the cause to make sure that we are documenting every single thing that we do. Some of the monitoring and evaluation we're doing, some of the reports that we're doing, to make sure that there's a record of how we got to a particular stage, so that it eventually becomes a model for the continent, or whether nationally even. And finally, we can get the Africa we want. Because at the end of the day, Agenda 2063 is about the Africa we want, right? How can we get there if we are still in the dark on what the AU does? So if the AU is still alive, and we believe it is, then we believe this is the model we can use to make sure that we get to the place that we want to be before 2063. My name is Ike Benson Jr. Thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to listen to this, and I hope that you've learned something, and I hope that we can use this, we can have further conversations where we continue to unpack how we can better approach Agenda 2063 for all of us. So we hope to speak to you next time. Have yourself a great day, and goodbye.